Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Bill Harley, who is a musician, but he's also a children's book writer. And for readers unfamiliar with your work, how would you describe what you write, Bill?
Well, I'm pretty I'm pretty eclectic. I have a number of picture books out. I did a lot of picture books when I first started to write books for kids.
Hmm.
But most of my work has been middle grade.
Great.
And a lot of it is what you would I guess call it reality based, although I do have one kind of fantasy thing because I wrote I love Roald Dahl, so I wrote a Roald Dahl book. But probably there's a couple. I've got a series about a fourth grade boy named Charlie Bumpers that kind of takes Charlie through fourth grade, and I have been as a performer and a storyteller and a singer, and now as an author, I've been in over 3,000 schools. So a lot of it is about the culture of school. And then there's another book in addition to my latest one, which is aimed at middle graders called Night of the Spadefoot Toads, which is about actually the area I live right around here in southeastern Massachusetts, and it's ended up. It's about a kid who discovers this endangered species, and it's ended up in a lot of curriculums across the country. So that book has had a pretty wide spread.
Wow.
So, but I'll try anything really.
That's a real, that's a reality thing. It's a real endangered species.
Yes, actually, it's it's this book. Look, we'll do a book talk. It's Night of the
Ah,
Spadefoot Toads.
Spadefoot toads. Okay.
Yes, and
Okay.
so they are the
Yeah.
habitat. They're endangered in this area.
Right.
There are other places in the United States where they're not at all, but habitat being a big deal. And I wrote the book because I got a friend. When we moved out here, I started to pay attention to where we lived, and I've got a friend who's a great naturalist, and she started taking me out. And late one night, she took me out to this vernal pool where we found these spadefoot toads, and I just wanted to share that. So anyway,
Oh, wonderful. Yeah,
yeah,
they're amazing.
they are. Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, one of the things about writing, especially if it's kind of you got to do your research. And that book, there was a lot of vetting. I wanted to get the natural history right, and I ended up finding more about frogs and toads and salamanders than I ever knew I was going to learn. So,
Oh, great. I've got some questions about research for you. Um, but I wanted to ask you, what can readers expect from your latest book, from your newest book?
okay, so my latest book, Now You Say Yes. I'll do this. I'll do the librarian thing. Years and years of watching librarian book talks. Okay. This book is it's aimed at a little bit older audience. So those, like the Charlie Bumpers books, are kind of like second to fifth grade, and the Spade for Toads, maybe third to sixth. This marketing of books is so specific now. But this is kind of more 10 to 14-year olds, and it's definitely reality based. And like these other books, the kids they're in families, they're dealing with issues, but their families are like kind of together, so that's not the issue. But in this one, the main character Amari was in the foster care system and was adopted into this family, and then the father moved out, and it's a single mom, and her brother, her adoptive brother, is younger and is on the autism spectrum. So there's a lot more kind of social issues in this, and how kids manage when they're presented with these challenges, more so than the other ones, I think. And so it's more current. Obviously, it takes place the summer of 2017, during the summer of was referred to as the Great American Eclipse. So it's very much. I think it's there's a lot of cliffhangers. It's a nail biter about whether these kids, they drive across the country looking for their grandmother, hoping that she'll take them in, and they don't know what's going to happen to them, and they're kind of going on a wing and a prayer. Mari's only 15, so she's not even supposed to be driving a car. She doesn't have a license, and they barely have enough money. So it's just this kind of it's one episode after another of the people they meet as they drive across this big country of ours.
Wow. So
Yeah.
they're looking for her, for their birth grandmother.
Well, so here's it is, yeah, it's one of those things. But then as you get into it, he's like, there's so many families. Like, what's normal actually? And that kind of runs through the book. Mari is always asking herself, like, what's normal here? So she was adopted into the family when they thought they couldn't have kids. This is all backstory, um, which has to come out during the story. And then after she was adopted, they got pregnant and had a kid, and that was Connor, her brother, who eventually presented to be on the spectrum. And so uh, I guess it's not giving away too much. It's the way a lot of kids' books begin with. The mom dies quite suddenly, and Mari, um, who had been in the foster care system, is not interested in going back into it at all. And she's also worried about her brother Connor, thinking he's never going to survive in this system, and she doesn't know of anybody else except their adoptive grandmother, her adoptive grandmother, um, who lives in Lynn, Massachusetts,
Yeah.
right outside of Boston. And but they have not seen her for 2.5, 3 years because they're estranged because of something that Mari had a part in. So she gets her brother in the car, and the only way she gets him in the car is he loves astronomy, and she says, "If you get in the car, because he's not interested, we'll go see the eclipse," which is all he's wanted to do for a year and a half. And so he's in, and he knows, being who he is, he knows exactly when it's going to be at whatever point in the country. Um, and so that's what gets him in the car, and that's they head to Missouri to do that, but they're on the way. They're on the way to Boston. I say I always think of that. Actually, one of the impetuses for this book all the way around was we had this um, nursery chant that we would do with our kids, where you bounce them on the knee and say, there's a bunch of different ways to say it, but say, on the way to Boston, on the way to Lynn, look out, little Noah, or you might fall in. So that's one of the things that they're thinking all the way along the trip. So from
That's
Los Angeles to the Boston area,
okay.
right
So
through Worcester,
yes, it would be
right
right.
on Route 90 there. Yeah.
So what do you think draws readers to these kinds of books?
um, well, you know, I think there's a couple things that I think about. I mean, I when I think about writing for kids, I tend to think more like of as a mystery writer than I would of as Proust, which is that what happens next is very important. And I say this about my oral storytelling too, is that like every book, a lot of books are asking a question at the beginning of the book, and it might be an immediate question like what's going to happen to me, but it's also a deeper question. Like in this book is very much about identity, because Mari, she's a foster kid, she's lost her mom, it's the only family she has is her brother, and who needs care. And so this question of who am I, so it's very much a question of identity. Um, and Mari kind of lives on the edge. So I think that the people who are reading this book are going, "Oh my gosh, I got to find out what happens to her." And she's very, very resilient, and for that matter, Connor is too. I, in some ways, one of the things that happens in this book is that they find out, both of them, that they really need each other. That they're absolutely dependent on each other to get this experience again. So I think that kids are going to read that, identifying with Mari, who's got so many challenges, but also with Connor too. And I think it's that hook. Like when I talk to people about storytelling, um, I'm always saying, in your story, you have to always ask yourself, what's the universal? What does this say? Aside from the plot and all that, the thing you're answering is, what does it say about the human condition and who we are? And at the heart of this book, Mari sees that what she thinks she's different from everybody else. But one of the things she discovers on this trip, because she's broken and she knows she's broken and she doesn't want to be broken, and she thinks that sets herself apart. But at the crux of this, she sees how broken all of us are, and that it's that brokenness actually which is the thing that we most have in common, if we can see through all the other differences, and that ought to be enough to get us through. Um, and so that kind of kindness and openness is very much part of, it's always been part of my work.
Interesting. So what was the inspiration for Now You Can Say Yes?
Well, it is, it's funny how things start. And this started very simply a long way from where the book ended up, which is I have some nieces in Los Angeles. Their mom is actually a elementary school teacher in the LA district. And one of the nieces, Tess, was visiting me when she was 14. And she said, I wish I could visit you more often. And I said, you should come. And she said, well, airplane tickets are expensive. And I said, well, why don't you drive? And she said, well, Uncle Bill, I'm only 14. And I said, but what if you had to? Because I think one of the things for a compelling story is it's something that somebody has to do, even if they're not aware why they have to do it. And so that really started this conversation in my head. Under what conditions? I look at building a story as in like a kind of a thought experiment, almost like a science experiment. Under what conditions would a kid have to drive across the country on their own? And in my visits to schools, at the end of talking about books and singing songs and telling stories, I would say, I got this idea for a book. And the kids were like, oh, the parents and the teachers were like, that's a bad idea. But the kids were like, this is awesome. And then, of course, they said, where do they get their money? And what if the car breaks down? And what if the police stop them? And, where do they go to the bathroom? And where are they going to sleep? And all those questions are absolutely essential, to the story. So I really kind of carried it around my head for a couple years. And then I decided I ought to take the trip. So I actually took I took the route that I thought that Mari and Connor would take. And I took it the week of the eclipse. So I was in Missouri on the day that Connor and Mari were in Missouri. We're not in exactly the same place. So I didn't actually meet them. That would have been very problematical. Somehow kind of
That would have been very strange. Yeah.
Yes, it would have been. Maybe they were there. So, and the trip really informed what happened in the book. I took notes all along the way, took a lot of pictures, and then the places I stayed, the things I saw, the people I talked to, some of them became part of the book.
So that was really your research for the book.
Yeah, that, and because both the kids are challenged, I did a lot of work in talking with people about the foster care system, and also a lot of work on autism, and trying to understand what autistic people experience, but also, and maybe more deeply, because it's really Mari's story, is what it's like for a kid, for a sibling, to have a brother or sister that's on the spectrum. Because my friend Barry Prezant, he's got this great book, Uniquely Human. He's really an expert on autism. He says, as many people do, if you meet one autistic person, it means you've met one autistic person. So some people are going to read this book and say, well, this doesn't reflect my experiences, or this is wrong. But it's a very tender subject, and I knew that walking into it. But it's Connor's life. And I think the other thing, and this is a really interesting balance too, because when a kid is on the spectrum and they're growing, it's hard to tease out what's developmental and what his neurological aspects are. Like all kids throw tantrums, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a tantrum doesn't necessarily indicate anything neurologically. So those things are very tender and fragile, and I'm aware that some people are going to say, "Well, this isn't right," but I kind of did the best I could. I got it vetted. And when I was done with it, I also vetted it with both people in the foster care system and people who were in the autism community to try to address those issues, knowing, you know, somebody's going to say
Um,
no, but there you go. Yeah, that's who they were. They showed up.
so what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out Now You Say Yes?
Um, well, I think that one was to get those to be sensitive to what those people are going through, because I'm very aware where kids lit is now, that we're hearing, and it's a good thing. We're finding a lot of voices that haven't been heard are being heard from too. And if you look at me, you'll see that I'm not a 15-year-old girl or a 9-year-old boy, uh, who've got their own individual challenges. But writing is about writing fiction is about imagining someone else's life. So there's a certain amount of hubris or daring in it. So I think that was the greatest challenge. And then, when I first started taking it around, it's the classic experience of writing a book. People say, "Well, no, 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 no." But I ended up with Peachtree, who I've worked with a lot before, and the same editor. The thing I I knew where this book was going. I knew what the last line of this book was going to be. The last line was written first. I knew where this book ended up, and I think you kind of write to that, and knowing that helped me in all this process to do it. Um,
Mhm.
and I said, we had a little chat before we were talking. I'm working on a new book now, and oh my gosh, I forget that I go through this every book. I think this is like horrible, and I don't see a way through this right now. I know where the book's supposed to go, but I just can't get there. Um, but that's kind of part of the process too. So I definitely went through that with Now You Say Yes.
So that's my next question is, what can we expect from you in the future?
Well, I'm always a little hesitant to talk about this, but so I've been a storyteller my whole life. I told stories to kids before I wrote books for 10, 15 years. Um, and so the book, it's a fantasy, and it's about storytelling. It's about how a young person, who right now is a girl, becomes a storyteller in this particular kingdom when the kingdom is in crisis. And she meets the person who had been the royal storyteller, is been put in the dungeon for a particular reason, basically because he won't tell the story that the ruler wants to be told. And Crow meets him, and she loves stories, and so she starts sneaking down there to learn. All she wants to do is to learn how to tell stories. So initially, it was this kind of device for me to talk about the different aspects. What's involved in learning how to tell a story, and how do you go about it, and what are all the different things. And so um, I've been telling stories um, since I'm 67. I've been telling stories to people since I was 19, and so I've kind of got this wealth of understanding about what happens, not on the page, but what happens when you and I right here are sharing a story. Of course, it's better if we were in the same space.
Right.
Um, so it's got that, but I figured out a pretty good book. I figured out a pretty good storyline too. So, but it is like now it's pulling teeth. I'm still looking for the style. Looking for the voice, and the voice is very different from Now You Say Yes. It's got to be. It's a storyteller's voice. an active narrator, you know.
Hmm. Yep.
The storyteller has to be absolutely involved in the telling of the story and
Of
making
course.
comments all along, which storytellers do.
Yep.
You know, the storyteller is a character too. So that's what I'm working on, and I'm hoping to have the first draft done by the end of January. That's what I've told myself. We'll see.
And there are other things too, right, that you're working on?
Oh yeah, yeah. So I know. Um, I've got. I actually have an album of songs for adults that's coming out. I've just done a remix. I've been working on it for way too many years. COVID has interrupted that. That'll be coming out at the beginning of the year. And I'm working on. I've written a radio drama series for families that's being produced by BYU Productions out in Utah, and it's 17 episodes, 17 15-minute episodes, and it's about a kid who is decides to be a detective in the middle school.
Wow.
And it's very much based on Don Quixote. He's a total romantic, has no idea what he's doing. He's read too many detective novels, just as Don Quixote read too many Knights of, the Tales of Chivalry. And he thinks he knows how to solve cases. And he's got a Sancho Panza, his friend Sam, who's only interested in the next meal. And so very much very humorous. A lot of my work, a lot of my stories, my told stories are humorous. They're about growing up. So this is very much in kind of that kind of realm. And I'm
Sounds great.
hoping they're finishing up the pilots. I'm hoping that comes out sometime next year. That's beyond me. I mean, beyond my I can't do anything about that except watch them finish.
Okay.
So there you
I've
go.
got I've got some questions for you about being a writer.
Sure.
What's your favorite part of being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
Um, I'd say there's two. And the first is when you know what to write and you know how to write it. That's just I
Okay.
and that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be your best writing, but there are times when uh, there is such a thing as flow, and you've got the voice and you know what you want to say. Um, but a lot of it is showing up. I mean, one of the things I learned about writing, my mom was a writer, I should say. My mom wrote for kids. My mom wrote for My Weekly Reader when I was a kid, and she wrote for reading books. And so I know what the reading process is, a writing process. But it took me a long time to understand that the main thing is you show up every morning and you go out there and you try to. My rules is I have to write for at least an hour. Um, and usually I will go longer than that, but I have to put in the hour. And sometimes I'm just looking at the clock or doing the word count. But then sometimes this thing happens where the characters do things that you didn't expect, or
Yep.
the narrator expresses something in a way that you didn't see coming, and so it's that process. I mean, this happens in songwriting, and I think any creative process. I think the creative disciplines are across the board similar. That sometimes you feel like you're just lucky to be there in that space when it's happening.
Mm.
Um, that you are just kind of a vessel for something else passing through you. Um, but Mary Oliver talks in her book on writing poetry. She says that there is a muse, and but you don't know uh, when the muse is going to show up. So you have to show up every day, and someday the muse will show up, and hope that the muse shows up. But if you don't show up, and one day the muse shows up and sees you're not there, the muse says, "I'll just go somewhere else." So your job is to show up every day and hope that some kind of intelligence, informs what you're doing. But you just don't know. So, and the other part is the feedback from somebody, and especially since I'm lucky enough to work mostly with kids, but I do work with adults too. You know, this some kid comes up to you clutching this book, and if I'm sure you're a reader, look where you look what you've got behind you. There is that moment when you're just part of this. There's this incredible communion that happens between the writer and the reader, and you see it in the kid's eyes. And truth is,
Excuse me.
um, you know, a kid's book is the one that a person's going to carry with them through their whole life. That feeling of that book that really touched them more so than we'll read books as adults that really move us, but probably nothing like, you know, BFG or Charlotte's Web or, you know, Tale of Despereaux or
Mm.
one of those books that you just like, this opened a world to me. So sometimes I see that, or I get a letter from a kid or a letter from a mom or a dad or a teacher that this book, you know, changed this person's life in some little teeny way. So that's kind of hard to, you know, that's not bad.
That's true. So, what's the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
I think that the I think the showing up thing is important, and I'm getting up there in years, and I'm still learning uh, that my my job. Early on in my performance career, I worked with a director, Benny Reel, a guy up in Maine, and he said to me, "Well, you're no virtuoso." He said, "But that's not really important." He said, "Your job's not to be the best; it's to be the only, and you have to find a way to say things that only you can say it. And if you can find that way, then you're going to find an audience." Um, so you do that as well as you can, and then there's a certain amount of letting go. A lot of times a book doesn't come out at the right time, or you know, there's or it doesn't. You know, some I've written some books that I don't understand why they're not published. You know, I think they're really good, but they haven't found a home. Um, but the we have people who write for kids have a very common experience, which is you go someplace, or maybe it's even after you've given a talk, or it's at a cocktail party, and someone says, "This is Bill Harley. He writes for kids," and then the person says, "Oh, I've written a children's book," right? And so, not to be too snarky, I then say, "Have you written another?" And they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, if you're a writer, you write one book, and while you're trying to sell that or do something, you go ahead and you write the next one." And that's probably the measure of, I think, what an artist is. Um, it's mostly and learning of the craft. I still feel like I feel like I'm beginning to understand this thing, you know.
Hmm. Okay. So, what piece of advice would you want to give to other writers?
Well, that you got to
Okay.
show up. Yeah, the inspiration is incidental. Um, and the, the good news I think is, although I don't, this is my indulgence, but I've convinced myself that it's important that reading everything you can is absolutely essential.
Hmm.
I learned something from most people. Not that some people I can't do what they do, but I think that's it. Um, the my perception is the publishing world is a horrible place. It's just, and my publisher is great, and they are going to look at anything I do, but it's hard out there. It really is. And I think if you write because you have to, because you want to find a way, and I think finding audiences is a whole other thing. You've got to devote yourself to figure out what that audience is. But um, the landscape's it's hard, and I wouldn't. I think writing is hard. I think one of the reasons I did it is because it's hard. I don't think it's easy. Um, but and I say that to kids, you know, they want you to come into a school and say, "Oh, writing can be so fun. It can be so joyous." And I was like, "Yeah, it can, but it's the problem is you got to think." And most people are actually really most people are not interested in thinking very much. So I
Okay.
don't know if that
Yeah,
was any help or not.
I think so.
Abandon hope, all ye who enter. No, I don't mean that at all. You know, the other thing is you get better at it. You get better. You definitely get better. It's like that's one thing that's good about being human is if you practice at it, you get better at it. You know,
Mhm.
and
So,
well, I think the other thing is make yourself available to other like, and this is hard for me to do, but you find people who you trust that will read and give you an honest appraisal. Um, but you know that they have your best interests in mind.
okay.
And those people are really valuable. I've got two or three readers that I know are really good readers, but also know that I know they're on my side, and you need that.
Yeah, my next question was, are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that have helped you in your career?
Well, I've got to say you know I have not done as good a job at finding writing groups, you know, as and they're definitely out there. I mean, I know SCBWI, Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, is just a really great organization. I'm kind of tangentially involved in that, but um, because of the nature of my work, as most of my life, um, I I've been a performer, and so I travel a lot, and my cohort mostly has been other storytellers and musicians. So those are the ones that I like. I work in performance with two or three other people I show stuff to. I've got three or four uh, readers, both locally and nationally. Some who are writers, who I can send things to. Uh, but I think getting over that hump of showing things to people is really important.
Hmm.
I could do a better job at it too.
Okay. We may be running out of time soon, but I've got a few more questions for you. What are some of your passions when you're not writing, and how do you make time for some of the hobbies that you love?
Well, one of the things, you know, I am kind of congenitally disposed to make stuff up. And so I can't. I am probably going to be making stuff up, you know, as they cart me out. And so I don't know that I'll ever be able to stop doing that. Um, but obviously, I'm a musician, and so I play music every day, some guitar and some piano, and a lot of the I compose at the piano, but I don't generally perform at it. So like I'm working on a Haydn piano sonata, which I'll never be able to play really well. It's amazing to me how I've been working on this piece for 4 months, and it's just, but that's like an hour a day. You know, I kind of in there plugging away, but I know it informs my work somehow. Um, I'm a beekeeper.
Really?
I yeah, I keep bees, and sometimes I love it, and sometimes I go, what what is that? This is horrible. It's a nightmare. Like you open up the hive and there's something horribly wrong. So it's a lot like life, right? uh, and then but I'm pretty active outside too. uh, I guess I think if I had to choose one of my favorite things, it's like having dinner and talking with really smart people is really one of the things I love to do, and I'm lucky enough to have some friends who are like that.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
I do
that's
that three or
very
four.
important.
It's been harder lately. Ah.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, yeah,
That's important, though.
yeah.
So what does your writing space look like? And what sort of things do you need to have around you when you're writing or editing?
Well, I'm sitting at my writing space right now. I'm hesitant to show you because I'm very disorganized. This looks okay right here. Actually, these things right here, See those little yellow slips?
Looks like you're
That's
organized.
that's well, that's an outline. That's a rough outline of the book I'm working on. Um, it's like one of my processes in the books. But over here's my music thing. It's just a disaster over there. There's all kinds of.
Wow.
It's just you know. Um, but the less the better. You know, I think I don't know if it was Annie Dillard. I'm trying to remember who said a beautiful place is not required. What's required is a white wall in front of you, or something like that. I can't be. Uh, I have to be in a place where I'm not distracted. Um, and I have this is actually a one-room house behind our house that was built at about the same time of the house in like 1880 something, and the people who sold us the house told us initially it was like a one-room candy factory, like it was a little cottage industry. So, but and now it's a cottage industry for me. Um, it's good. I've got a. I mean, of course, we can do this stuff online, but I've got a bunch of different thesauruses around here because I'm always looking. You know, there is a word, and then I have a guitar here for when I get really bored. I believe I should not have it there. It's
Okay.
just,
Now, are there
like
any
having the internet, you know.
are there any like food or drinks or things like that that you have to have with you?
No, I mean I usually come out here with so my rule is I try to write for at least an hour a day when I'm working on something, you know, and I'm pretty good at doing that. I usually come out with tea and coffee. I do actually. I oftentimes I'll have some music on, but it can't be vocal music. I can't hear human voices,
Hmm.
and it can't be Cecil Taylor really out jazz. It's more like you know like Bach, or although there's a lot of kind of minimalist jazz that works pretty well for me. Right now I'm a huge fan of this Italian jazz trumpet player Paolo Fresu, whose music is just really great, but it's also it, it's more ephemeral, you know, which is that somehow helps me, you know.
Okay.
I think some
So
kind of constancy, nothing too out. I do like out jazz, but that I don't want that. Or you know, Springsteen, no, you know, no Springsteen while I'm while I'm working on some. I got my own words. I don't want somebody else's words messing me up.
right. So do you prefer silence or do you prefer having some kind of music?
I think usually, I guess music. I think
Okay.
you know,
All right.
but you know, when you're in the middle of it, I mean, this is the thing. What's going to get you there? Um, and I think a certain amount of fiddling at the beginning. I remember reading, you know, Tony Hillerman said, like, you know, he's a great detective writer, and he just said, I do everything I can before I write. He said I spend most of my time rewriting what I wrote the day before, and then you know, finally at the end, uh, I had a number of years ago when I was kind of wrestling with this process. I went and I heard Russell Banks talk, and I had this really nice talk with him afterwards. And I told him what I was working on and the trouble I was having, and he said, "You know, I think if a writer writes for an hour a day, they'll do their life's work." And there was a that really turned it for me, because then I think the first thing was I saw this kind of broad expanse of what your work is, um, and that it's not necessary that you write 5,000 words a day, or that. I mean, I think Naipaul said he wrote 300 words a day, which is it's not really very much, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I think it's, and there's you know one writer after another said it's the constancy of doing that. So when he said that to me, I it was kind of horrifying, because then I was out of excuses, because some people's lives are very difficult and challenging. They have to carry you know a couple jobs at a time, but mostly it's a matter of priority. If you're not writing, and say it's not an hour, say it's a half hour, you know. If you're not writing day after day after day, it's probably not because you don't have the time. It's because it's where you're prioritizing it.
Mm.
And that's a very sobering realization
Good point.
for most of us. But it's that's the thing.
Good point. Um, Another question. Writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them through their work or hinder them through their work. And do you have any? And what do you have? And how do they help or hinder you?
Yes, he does not help. We've got a 3-year-old border collie. And he is absolutely not allowed in here because he would bring the ball or the frisbee in, or if I wasn't paying attention, he would turn over the garbage can, and climb up on my lap and say, "It's time for us to go to work." And he doesn't mean sitting at the computer. Um, but he does provide when I need a break. He's always ready to go, and I think one of the hard things. I mean, a lot of people who are writers, they have structured their days, and I mean, a lot of people in education or teachers who are writers too. Um, but you know, structuring a day can be really long if it's wide open. And that's why I try to do the writing the first thing. That kind of it feeds that monster. But it's good to have some structure in your day. And my kids are out the door, and so the dog, the dog is like at 3 o'clock. It is time. You are done with whatever you're doing for the day because we're gonna go for a long walk. Otherwise, there's hell to pay.
Okay.
We'll see if he ends up in we'll see if he ends up in any stories. There should be, but
Definitely should be.
him and the bees. They both. I haven't figured out where the bees. I mean, I've been keeping bees for 15, 20 years. I'm waiting for them to show up in a story, but they haven't showed up yet.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they should definitely.
I know. It's an amazing, amazing thing. The bees are just astounding. I think it's so big, I don't even know how to approach it. So,
Okay, I just have two quick questions for you. One is, where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I'm going to plug
Annie's
in.
Books from Worcester, yes, first there, and it's available on all those digital platforms that shall remain nameless. And also, if you go to my website, we'll we've got everything that I probably have maybe 15 books for kids I've written. We've got them all, and I can autograph them for you too if you go there. But the books are being distributed. The books do, although I'm on Peachtree, which is a smaller publisher, they've got a good distributor. And so if you go to your local bookstore and say, "Can you get this book by Bill Harley?" They can get it for you.
Okay, and you can call 508-796-5613 and get it from Annie's, or email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. So sorry, I had to plug it.
Oh no, you got to. No, and I was like, I'm only an hour. I've been probably, I don't know, I'm about an hour away from you. I live in Seekonk, which is right outside of Providence.
Yes,
So
that's
right up 140, right up 146.
not too far. You're a local. Okay, and the last question I have is, how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
So if you go to my webpage, it's just billharley.com. I send out a newsletter 3, 4, 5 times a year about what I'm up to, and all my recordings are there. I have over 40 recordings of my songs and stories, and you can download the stuff there. You can also find all that stuff on, well, not all of it, but a lot of it is on Spotify, and a number of my books are the audio versions are available on Audible and some other platforms. And actually, I should say, my first chapter book, Amazing Flight of Darius Frobisher, which was, I mentioned, the Roald Dahl book. It came out 15 years ago, but this Montana Public Radio, which has been a huge kind of fan of mine for years. They just did a reading of the book, and the reading is great. I listened to it with trepidation, and I just listened on the way down to some family for Thanksgiving, and the reading is great, and it made me. I was like, wow, this book is really good. I hadn't read it for years. I wasn't sure, so I'm very excited about that, and that'll be available on our website too. So
Great.
yeah, so you go to my website, and we'll let you know if I'm in your area. If I end up not traveling so much anymore for some reason, but I hope to do a little bit more.
Great. And hopefully one of these days you'll get to Annie's.
Me too. Yeah, I hope so too. I hope so too.
And also, Bill, you're going to be reading part of one of your stories for us, and we'll put it up on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, I'll read a chapter. I'll read. You wish me the first chapter or middle chapter out of Now You Say Yes. So
Okay, that sounds wonderful. So we will be seeing you in a few minutes then.
Okay, take care. Thanks for talking.
Thanks. Bye.